Welcome to day 2 of 2022 SEC Football Media Days. This is the hardcore crew. This is the crew that wants to learn about football officiating and football rules. And so we're going to meet that expectation. Over the next 30 to 45 minutes, you're going to have a graduate level degree in managing the game of football from an officiating perspective. I'm going to introduce now John McDaid. John is our coordinator of football officials. He'll be entering his 3rd season. He was hired and supposed to meet with our athletics directors the day we shut everything down in 2020. So his first year as our coordinator was managing through the pandemic last season. We look forward to his work in the season ahead. Notably, John worked in a number of conferences prior to his time as a white hat or a referee in the Southeastern Conference, including the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, the Big East Conference, the American Athletic Conference, and his on-field career concluded with his time as a referee in the Southeastern Conference. So welcome to the stage, SEC Coordinator of Football Officials, John McDaid.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. Media Days is the de facto kickoff for the football preseason, and it's an exciting time. Everyone's undefeated. No one's suffered any in-season injuries yet. What can be accomplished in the season, the sky's the limit. But it also means there hasn't been any football officiating controversies yet, which means officiating is a non-compelling topic. And that's good for the officiating business, right? That puts a smile on my face. There's a reason we're here at 8:15 in the morning to talk about officiating. So thank you for being here. I have 3 general topics I'm going to talk to you about today. The first is using the NCAA data for FBS football for the 2021 season. I'll kind of give you a state of the game at high level using those statistics. Secondly, we're going to be talking about the new rules, and this year there is a new playing rule that without a doubt affects how the game's being coached and how the players need to perform on the field. And then the third thing I'm going to provide to you is something a little out of the ordinary for me to be talking about at Media Days. It's a what-if scenario, a what-if about the playing rules, that if we made a tweak here, what would it do to the game? And it's a topic that's been talked about on and off for years, and I think you'll find that topic compelling. So, with that, overall game time, it went down. We're down to 3:18, basically back where we were 2 years ago. The SEC was at 3:21, so we're about 3 minutes over the FBS average of 3:18. This is rather flat, not a lot here. This tells me, and it tells the stakeholders of the game that are caretakers of the rules, that there's not much that needs to be done related to overall game time. They pay more attention to how many games go over 3.5 hours. And depending on the conference, it's somewhere between 10 to 20% of a conference slate of games will go over the 3:30 mark. But as an average, 3:18 and even 3:21 in the SEC is a good number. Not a lot of concern there. Let's look at it against scoring. Scoring average is down a bit nationally, and it's just a bit. The SEC was just above the national average, but not even by a whole point. So you can see that there is some dependency between these two curves. As scoring goes up, game time typically goes up. As scoring goes down, game time typically goes down. It's rather intuitive. Nothing here that's alarming. Nothing here that the stakeholders of the game thought they needed to react to. Number of plays per game is something that we're talking about quite a bit. That topic is something we talk about now more than we talk about overall game time. Again, a fairly dependent relationship between the number of plays that are in the game and the overall game time. We are just below the national average And again, we're basically right there at 179.5 plays. We certainly have some teams that have a higher average than that. We had 10 games last year that were officiated. We had 103 overall games that were officiated by the SEC staff. 10 of those games were at least 200 plays, with a high of 227 plays on a game. Conversely, we also had 13 games that had 160 or less. So it is a fairly consistent bell curve. We don't have more data points to one side or other of the average. It is a fairly almost perfect bell curve. It is curious to note, and I just discovered this a few days ago preparing to speak with you today, at the national level in FBS, there were 2 games that had 229 plays. That was the high for the year. There was a game that had 127 plays played in the Big 12 conference. And I find this interesting because that's an 80% variance from the lowest number of plays in a game to the highest number of games. And there's not much that we talk about looking at statistics of where the state of our football that has an 80% delta. That's pretty striking. Hit the wrong button. Here's the statistic that is the big surprise to me. If you were here last year, you heard me talk about concern for the number of times on average that we're stopping the game for replay review, the fact that it's trending upwards. I talked about that if the growth that we had seen for the 5 years leading up to this time last year had continued for another 5 years, we were going to almost be at averaging 3 stops per game. Well, lo and behold, we play the 21 season, and we're back down to 2.2 where we were 2 seasons ago. I don't have an explanation for this. It is something that I like to see. It's not that I'm not a proponent of replay, but I think the number of stops per game is a fairly good indicator of how we're doing on the field. Less plays to review in the replay booth means we're doing a better job on the field. So I certainly welcome going down to 2.2. Is it a wild point? Is the 2.5 the previous season, is that the wild point? Or is the 2.2 this past season, is that the wild point? We don't know. It's just, we don't see that the next bump on the trend that I was talking about last year. This makes us comfortable. We were right at, in the SEC, we were right at the national average of 2.2 stops per game. But here's something to consider. The NCAA statistics are what's factual. We evaluate how we do in the replay booth each and every week, each and every game, just like we do on the field. And one of the statistics that I keep is how many missed stops that we have. When you're evaluating in a replay program, the 2 big statistics that you're always monitoring is how often do you get the correct outcome when you stop the game for a replay review? I call this accuracy. Obviously, the metric you're shooting for is 100%. 100% of the time, when you stop the game to go to replay, you come out with the correct outcome. The second statistic is how often do we fail to stop the game when there's some compelling video evidence that says maybe we need to take a second look at this. The tempo of our game challenges us in this area, and it's one of the things that we work with our officials on this past off season, is their ability to get to 2 or 3 camera angles in just a 10 or 12 second window to account for the up-tempo offenses that we see in our conference, and we can figure out whether there is compelling video evidence or not, or whatnot. We had 5 missed stops in, it's a judgment on my part. In reviewing the 103 games that we officiated last year, we had 5 missed stops last year. And if you do the math with 103 games overall, our 2.2 should have been 2.25 or 2.3. So I wish we were I'm here to say to you today that we were at 2.3, because that means we had 0% missed stops on the season. But we're in a good place overall nationally with just 2.2 reviews per game. The next thing we'd be looking at is our fouls per game. This is almost a straight line. A low of 4.2 fouls per game nationally across the FBS in 2016. We just had another season with 14.4. The SEC was just below that with 14.3 fouls called per game. And you can see there doesn't seem to be, there's probably the least amount of dependency between these two curves than anything that I've shown you. The number of fouls per game doesn't appear to dictate what your game time is going to be, like we saw with scoring or the number of plays during a game. And I believe this is the last curve I'll show you with FBS data from the NCAA. This is the number of targetings per game. We went down here. Just one targeting call every 5 games on average in FBS for the 2021 season. This is reflective of just how the game is being played. We did not officiate this any different between 2020 and 2021. The definition of what is targeting was constant. Our point of emphasis on targeting is no different. But it's statistically significant how much it went down year over year. Again, can't necessarily explain this other than hopefully it represents that the athletes are recognizing the rule, how the game needs to be played legally, and it's showing up here in the fact that we have less targetings per game than we had the year before. We were right at the 0.2 targetings per game, one targeting every 5 games in the SEC for the 21 season. This curve, I already talked, so the blue curve is the number of stops per game over the last 11 years. I used this chart last year, and obviously I added one more year onto it. I've already talked about that 2.2. This is the orange line is the average review time across the FBS once we do stop a game. It's rather flat. We had a low of 114 in 2013. We're up to 125 in 2021. This is something where we monitor more. How often do we have reviews more than 2 minutes? Then, hey, we're at 125, can we shave 3 or 4 or 5 seconds off? We're in a good place here. I also want to go back to something I said earlier. When you're evaluating where you are for your replay program, your accuracy when you stop the game, did you come to a correct outcome? And did you stop the game every time there was compelling video evidence? Those two statistics are much more important, in my opinion, than what the overall review time is, particularly when we're only taking, on average, 1:25. In the SEC, we were at 1:23. We were 2 seconds quicker than the national average. This is in a good spot. I tell our officials, I'll worry about this number when we get to 100% accuracy and 0% missed stops 2 or 3 seasons in a row. This just shows the number of fouls called per game for the last 5 seasons against the national average. The SEC, once again, continued its trend of being just slightly below the national average. Only in 2018, in the last 5 years, were we above by 0.2 fouls per game. Another way to look at it, here's the SEC's average of 14.3 fouls called per game for the 21 season. I'll add the other 4 Autonomy 5 conferences. You see 2 of the conferences had more, 2 had less. The median of this data set for the 5 autonomy conferences is 14.3. The SEC is right on the median. And if I go and add the group of 5 conferences on the fouls per game, this is how it stacks out. The median here turns into 14.1. The average is 14.4. No, 3, I think it was for 21 season. So that's it. When I look at all of that data, the only thing that really jumped out at me is the fact that our number of replay stops per game went down statistically significant from 2.5 to 2.2. That's a good thing. We'll see what the 2022 season renders in that area. So let's move forward to talking about new playing rules. And I talked about there is one significant change that's going to affect how the game is coached and played, and that is blocking below the waist. Blocking below the waist is still allowed in certain circumstances, but those circumstances have shrunk. There are less opportunities to block below the waist than there were in previous seasons. Still based on the concept of the tackle box, which is 5 yards laterally each direction from the snapper. The snapper is typically the center, but sometimes we have unbalanced lines, and it does affect the definition of the tackle box, and I do have a play that I'll show you to illustrate that. Simply put, for the circumstances where a player is allowed to block legally below the waist, the first requirement is that that player is stationary at the snap inside the tackle box. If you're in motion or you're stationary outside of that tackle box, in no circumstances can you any longer block below the waist legally. Quarterbacks and running backs almost always are in the tackle box. By the way, the tackle box goes all the way to the end line behind the offense. So it doesn't matter the depth of the quarterback, he is always in, or the running back for that matter, always in the tackle box. A wingback needs to get what we say, get a piece of the tackle that's in the tackle box. In other words, some part of the body of the wingback or halfback needs to shade a part of the tackle for that wingback or halfback to be considered to be in the tackle box. This wingback in this position here is in the tackle box, and if he's stationary, he has the ability to legally block low, although he does have extra requirements that I'll get to in a second. Tight ends can no longer legally block low under any circumstance. If you talk to your coaches, this is a fairly big change for them. This is something that they will have to scheme differently because of this rule change. If the wingback doesn't, or a halfback doesn't get a piece of the tackle, cannot block low legally in any circumstance. Anyone split out wide can no longer block low under any circumstance. Anyone in motion, whether they're in the tackle box or not at the snap, because they're not stationary, cannot block low under any circumstance. The linemen that are the linemen that are stationary in the tackle box, they can block low up to 1 yard beyond the line of scrimmage in the defensive side of the ball. And they don't have a requirement to get directed from the front. They can, at their initial line surge, block low against their opponent as long as it's not a clip. And a clip is at the knee or lower from behind. So they can block from the side, they can block at the thigh high on their initial line charge only. Once their initial line charge is over, they can no longer block low legally unless they get directed from the front. We used to talk about 10 to 2. We added some language in the rule book talking about directed from the front. Initial line charge, they can go from the side. After initial line charge, if the ball's still in the tackle box and they're still in the tackle box, they can block low, but they have to get directed from the front. Some circumstances or situations that we see. A pulling guard. A pulling guard can block low only if the block is in the tackle box and the ball is still in the tackle box. If the guard gets outside of the tackle box, cannot go low, needs to block at the waist or above. This wingback that we talk about, a lot of times they perform what is called the wham or the seal block on the backside. This wingback is stationary in the tackle box. He can block low if he's directed from the front and the block is in the tackle box. If that defensive end stays outside the tackle box, he cannot be blocked low in any circumstance. The block needs to be in the tackle box. Running backs, a lot of times they stay into max protect. As long as the blocks are in the tackle box, they can go low, but they have to get directed from the front. If they go outside of the tackle box, they can no longer block low. The defense, there are new restrictions on the defense. The only defenders that can block low are defensive linemen that are in the tackle box. And for this purpose, the tackle box extends onto the other side excuse me, of the line of scrimmage. And like how we judge wingbacks and halfbacks, if a defensive player is shading a tackle that's in the tackle box, that defensive player is considered in the tackle box. These defenders can block low on their initial line surge. No other defender can block low in any circumstance. And one of the things I'll show you in the video is that on a screen play or a stretch play, a defender coming in and taking out the lead blocker by going low, that's no longer a part of the game. That is now an illegal play. That defender cannot go low. So let's look at some video. Just stop it right here, Ryan. Here's my right tackle. Here's my left tackle. This is my left tight end. So this is the tackle box between these two. This tight end cannot block low. This, I'll call him a halfback. I'm going to determine he's not shading the tackle here. And so neither one of these can block low. And if we could just go far enough to see their initial blocks, the left tackle. So we see the left tackle going low. This is considered initial line surge. That's legal. But let's watch our tight end. Our tight end goes low. Last year, this was legal because it was directed from the front. This year, that is an illegal block. Because he was not stationary in the tackle box at the snap, that is now considered an illegal block. Let's go to the next play, Ryan, and just stop it. We're not even going to play it. Go back. This is a tackle over formation. We're going heavy to the right side. This is a tackle and this is a tackle. Guard, guard, and this is a tight end. Oh, and the last one is on the defensive side of the ball, can no longer cut the lead blocker. We have a number of rule changes that are in penalty only, which is to say the definition of the foul hasn't changed. How we're going to administer the penalty to it has changed. And I'll go through these. The first is there's a rule, you don't see this that often. In fact, trying to find some video for it, it's very tough because it rarely ever happens. If a receiver, deep receiver, signals for a fair catch, he cannot block a kicker coming down the field unless that receiver has touched the ball. Used to be a 15-yard penalty. The Rules Committee recognized that a simple block doesn't really meet the spirit of what a personal foul is, and personal fouls are the 15-yard penalties along with unsportsmanlike conduct. So they changed this penalty to just a 10-yard penalty. Now, if his block is otherwise a personal foul, let's say he signals for a fair catch and blocks low on a kicker coming downfield, now it is a personal foul for an illegal block below the waist during a change of possession down or kick down, and it would be a 15-yard penalty. The second is we often have rule changes that are specific to a player plays that happened. And this is an example of one of them. Illegal touching of a forward pass. So that's the intentional touching of a forward pass by an ineligible player, typically happens by the interior lineman, now carries a loss of down. Last year in previous seasons, it was 5 yards from the previous spot, but you got to replay the down. Now it is a loss of down. There was a play in the ACC 2 years ago. It was a two-point conversion. The design of the play was for an offensive tackle to back up as if he was pass protecting, and then back up enough so that a forward or backwards pass was going to be thrown to him, which is legal, and then he was going to run it with some lead blockers in for the two-point conversion. The execution of the play, the defense disrupted the rhythm of the play, and the offensive tackle did not get deep enough. It turned into a forward pass, and the officiating crew that day had an illegal touching by an originally ineligible player, penalized 5 yards for the previous spot, and they got to replay the two-point conversion. We recognize it doesn't meet the spirit of the rules. The spirit of the rules are that if you're going to throw a forward pass and you're going to have, or you're going to use a backwards pass, you're going to use some deception in the game, you need to be perfect. And if you're not, you're going to lose your ability to replay that down, which matches what we have for intentional grounding and any other illegal forward passes, pass thrown from beyond the line of scrimmage, second forward pass, throwing it down, or whatnot. This is an excellent rule change. The penalty for defensive holding. We used to have a specific scenario of defensive holding against an eligible receiver to get an automatic first down. And if we didn't get those specifics, it was just a 10-yard penalty without an automatic first down. The Rules Committee has decided to simplify this. Get rid of all the exceptions. Defensive holding now is always 10 yards and an automatic first down. It might be helpful to note that in the NFL, it's a 5-yard penalty, but it is also always an automatic first down. There were the two scenarios for the eligible receivers were the pass had to cross the line of scrimmage and the foul had to be beyond the line of scrimmage. And there was just too many circumstances where we'd have a receiver circling, like a running back running a circle route. He would be held behind the line of scrimmage, and because the foul was behind the line of scrimmage, the penalty didn't carry an automatic first down. Rules Committee decided, and I agree with them here, probably doesn't meet the spirit of what we're trying to do in protecting eligible receivers, so now it always has a first down. And I want to talk about this. I have two plays. Questions are coming up on if we have hold on a punt, who's the offense and who's the defense? We can go to our last two video plays, please, Ryan. So in this play, we're going to watch, we're just going to watch this. Just keep toggling back and forth. The judgment officials use on the receiving team is that if the receiver at the snap plays the return, he's not penetrating into the offensive backfield, has a blocking assignment, he's trying to stop the kicker on kick coverage from getting downfield, we're treating that receiver as an offensive player right then and there. Only if a receiver goes into the offensive backfield for the purposes of trying to block a kick, we're going to treat that player as a defender until he finally stops advancing and turns around and retreats. So on this play, you're going to see that our end at the top of the screen, right here, and our end down here. They're the only two that penetrate into the backfield. So we're going to treat them as defenders, as defensive players, until they're done with this action with the shield. The other 9 receivers we're treating as offensive players right after the snap. So we're going to see a play right here at the plus 48 or the minus 48, depending on your perspective, and he dumps him right here. This is offensive holding. This is not defensive holding. We're going to go back to the previous spot and give the kickers an automatic first down. How could you have a defensive hold on a scrimmage kick, punt, PAT field goal? The only thing I can think of, and we'll go to the next play, is the idea of a pull and shoot. We're going to watch this number 97 right here. He goes across the line and grabs his opponent to try to pull him out of the way for number 5 to go ahead and shoot through the hole. This would be considered defensive holding. And I recognize it's not a punt. I thought sometime in the last 5 years I had seen this kind of action on the shield in front of a punter, but I couldn't find it. That's the only thing I could think of where we would have a defensive holding on the receivers on a kick. Everything else, typically, we're officiating as an offensive hold. We can go back to the slides, please. Unsportsmanlike conduct. A lot of words here. I make it very simple for you. A number of years ago, we introduced the idea of a live ball unsportsmanlike conduct foul. Prior to the rule change, all unsportsmanlike conduct fouls, whether they happened during the live ball period or the dead ball period, were treated as dead ball foul. And if you remember, we created the rule change so if we have the player with the ball going in for a long touchdown and does something to taunt his opponent, wave a ball in his face, turn around, exaggerate his stride or whatever the fact, we're now treating that as a live ball foul. And so if at the 6-yard line he starts to taunt his opponent, he fouled on the 6-yard line, we're going to take the touchdown off the board, we're going to penalize the 15 yards from the 6-yard line, and now they're going to have, first and 10 from the 21. When we did that, there were two circumstances that we didn't recognize what we did from a penalty enforcement. And if we have a live ball, unsportsmanlike conduct foul, the intent is that we're going to enforce it just like a personal foul. And the two circumstances were by the receivers on a punt and the defense on a passing play. And the rule change, simply put, is now if we have an live ball unsportsmanlike conduct by the receivers during a punt, or we have a live ball unsportsmanlike conduct foul by the defense during a passing play, it now gets enforced just like a personal foul. There was an inequity if we had those two situations, and those two situations are fairly rare, so we weren't seeing them a lot. Disqualification carryover for targeting. Again, I want to emphasize, no change to the definition of what is or is not targeting. No change to the judgment we're using on the field or in the replay booth for what is or is not targeting. The only change is the penalty, and this is the penalty for targeting is much longer. I've only included here the last paragraph that's been added. If we have a second half targeting, player's disqualified for the remainder of that game, has a carryover for the first half of the next game. That carryover part of the penalty is now reviewable post-game. And the way it works is the review will be done at the national level by Mr. Steve Shaw, National Coordinator of Football Officials. And the conference can decide to appeal to Mr. Shaw to review the play for the purposes of removing only the carryover disqualification for the first half. There's two key words or phrases in what I've shown you here. The first is that if the national coordinator concludes that it is clearly obvious that there was not targeting on the player and should not have been disqualified, the conference can vacate the first half carryover disqualification for that player. One last rule change, it has to do with adjusting the clock on a replay review. We have this concept in replay that if we have a reversal and we go from a running clock to a stop clock, we can put time back on the game clock. 2020 and prior, we could do this any time in the game. In 21 last year, we changed it. We could only do it in the 2 minutes left in the first half or 5 minutes left in the second half. The change for 2021, it's now 2 and 2. One last thing that I wanted to show you real quickly. SEC worked with Navigate. Navigate is a company that brings business intelligence to athletic teams and conferences and leagues. We asked the questions, what would happen if the game clock started again after an incomplete pass, just like it does for a runner out of bounds? What would happen in the game? And we worked with Navigate, and we said, let's have a trial rule change. Let's say that we wind the clock after an incomplete pass, other than the last 2 minutes of the first half, last 5 minutes of the second half. For our sample set, let's use the 56 2001 SEC conference games. And let's use an analysis where we use observables in the video to figure out what time would run off the clock if we did wind it after an incomplete pass. And then go take all of the data analytics for those 56 games from Pro Football Focus and algorithmically determine what it would do to the game. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, he's going to go to how it's going to save overall game time. Curiously enough, we found something that's much more compelling if you do this, and that is the number of plays that are not played in the game. And in Navigate's analysis, they have 80.2 plays per team, and what that is basically half of the number of plays a game because it's a platoon of football now. The defense or the offense is only on the field for roughly half the plays. In using the analytics for the sample set, the 2021 season, 962 plays were run on average for each team per game. With the rule change, for the season, for the rule change, it goes down to 830. That represents 1.65 games if you divide it by the 80.2. fairly compelling number. But what's even more compelling is if you take it and put it across a postseason, whether your postseason is just simply a bowl game, maybe it's a conference championship in a bowl game, or maybe in the future it's an expanded college football playoff format. And you can see that if you had a 16-game schedule, which would be you played your 12 regular season games, you played a championship game, and then you had up to three college football playoff games, you'd be saving 2.2 games of wear and tear on the player by this rule change. The SEC believes this is something that's compelling, and it's going to be asking the Rules Committee to consider in out years. That's it for me. I thank you for your time, and remember to think of me when you get to sleep in a little bit later tomorrow and you start at 9 o'clock. Have a great season.
Thank you, John. We'll continue here in a few moments. Again, if you'll silence your cell phones,